Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. I'm Jonny Farrow. If you don't know me, thanks to everyone here that's been working so hard to make this conference go very smoothly. Really appreciate that. And I'm very grateful to the World Forum for inviting me here to talk today in this beautiful setting. So thanks so much for being here in person and also out there in Zoom land. A bit about me, I'm an assistant professor for art and design at Troy University in Troy, Alabama. And before that, I was working at New York University in Abu Dhabi for about 9 years. For the past 15 years, I've been teaching classes in sound art and sculpture, radio, printmaking, circuit bending, other things as well, but was co-head of the New York Society for Acoustic Ecology for a time in the early 2000s. And the engagement with this particular community of artists and scholars and scientists have made a huge impact on my thinking about sound and what I now refer to in my work as sound as a poetics. And when I say my work, I mean visual art. So work primarily in sculpture. And this talk, if you haven't figured it out by now, is entitled, "When We Hug, I Hear Your Ear." Okay. So this is a little janky for me, sorry. While studying for my first master's degree in music at the City College of New York in the early 2000s, I found the general discourses of music to be really conservative, and I was feeling that there had to be another space into which I could work, maybe even against the sort of well-worn paths of academic composition. And my thesis from that time, out of that context, strongly informed my sonic and visual practices as I went forward. And that thesis was about John Cage's Imaginary Landscapes, Edgar Varèse's poem Electronique, and Pierre Schaeffer's Symphonie pour un homme seul. And my claim in that thesis was that all of those compositions were compositions that resisted inscription in some form, even though there were some written, the Imaginary Landscapes have scores. And the way that Varèse put poem Electronique together was very interesting and unusual, let's say. So it just, they all became these sort of very good examples for me out of the Western canon of noise as a material for composition, and how this turn away from the traditional instruments of the orchestra radically altered the way music could be inscribed, performed, interpreted, and disseminated. And these works, of course, coincided with the development of recording technologies and radio and other electronic instruments. But this was only the beginning of discoveries for me. This is Robert Morris's Box with the Sound of Its Own Making. This had a huge impact on my understanding of how one could define sound art and develop a practice with sound as a poetics. Box is a wooden cube with a speaker inside, and it's designed to play back a recording that Morris made of himself building the box, right? So I don't know if you guys are familiar with this work, but Morris simultaneously spotlights and obscures the process of making the box by enclosing the speaker. We can hear the sounds of its construction, but still have to imagine the process. We have a piece of evidence, the box, and a trail of breadcrumbs, which is the sound of its making. And those things together complete the work. So I think that was really interesting to me. It just struck a chord. And this play between object and sound and concept was very generative. The next thing early on in my sort of switch away from music was this book by Alan Licht, Sound Art. I'm sure people know this book really well. And because of my newly forming relationships with acoustic ecology and transmission arts in particular, I was beginning to think more broadly about sound, and specifically thinking of it through a visual art context and less through a musical one. And I was finding myself drawn more and more to the broader and more outward-facing discourses of contemporary art, in visual art in particular, into which sound artists were really inserting themselves at this time in the early 2000s. There were tons of books that were published, and there continued a very large stream of very interesting books about sound and sound art and sound studies. But anyway, this really opened my mind to what working with sound in a non-musical context could be. And through this survey of the field at the time, I really began to understand that objects had real power, and that the semiotics of sound had an incredible potential to be explored beyond the Cagean ideal of sound in and of itself, which is one of his famous concepts, and was argued about quite strongly by Seth Cohen in the non-cochlear book. Another amazing formative work for me that I found during this time was Stephen Vitiello's Finding Pictures in Search of Sounds. Here he is out on a field recording trip, and he took photographs while making these recordings. And then he made the photographs into a loose leaf book. And the images are very evocative, and pairing them with the concept of sound. So through the title, right? He's divorced the sound from the image, but it reinforced to me that sound as a concept could be just as interesting and powerful as hearing these field recordings that he made. So these three works, Morris, Vitiello's, and Licht's, became early touchstones, a kind of method of making, and I would say a poetics. They demonstrated to me that it was possible to make visual art with sound as a defining feature, combining materials, ideas, language, sound, actual or conceptual sound, to form a new open meaning. An artwork could make sound, or it could simply refer to sound, and you could call it sound art or not. And for me, sound opened all kinds of doors that the study of music had not opened, interestingly. In addition to these discoveries on my path, I would credit the field of acoustic ecology for sure, with its sensitive ears, listening to culture, to nature, to science, to everything of and adjacent to sound, for opening my own ears to sound's multivalent possibilities. Written language makes a sound when read in the head, and so do images and objects. So for me, reading is spoken. It's either I'm reading it aloud or it's in my mind's ear while I read. So I would propose that there's a very close and complementary relationship between sound art and conceptual language-based art. There can be. I returned to school in 2011 to work on an MFA at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. That's where I met Eric Leonardson. Hi, Eric, if you're listening, and began experimenting with the relationship between sound art and conceptual sort of language-based art. This work is from 2013. It reads Und, Erst, and On Tu. It is a photo-etched print with a cryptic phrase and letters arranged in such a way that the viewer must sound it out in order to understand it. One of my MFA grad school advisors, when first presented with this work, thought it was Dutch. And that was quite funny. And if you know anything about SAIC, you could probably deduce who that might have been. But anyway, it sounded out correctly, you would easily understand the phrase to read, "You understand, don't you?" But to get there requires some visual and some sonic play. So it's this kind of image, sound, language, trying to work together. So it's an early piece. So as my practice developed, I began to think more about sounds that images could make. And here's an example of one of those paintings, which is an image and a title working together to give you the sonic clue. This one's called Trajectory 6, Out of Gas, from 2021. And I would expect that the viewer would imagine the sound that this painting represents, knowing that Out of Gas is the title. And I don't know if you guys want to try to make the sound, you can try it out aloud or in your head, however you like. And then sort of like onomatopoeic sort of words are interesting as well. Even though this isn't really an onomatopoeia necessarily, but it's that sort of cutesy little sound that you make when you touch a baby on the nose or like a little puppy or something, boop. And I was discovering during grad school, like I had that sound in my head, boop, all the time. And I would, because I was so busy and filled with ideas, I would walk down the street and I would just be saying boop. And I don't know, I had it checked out, therapy. It's working pretty well so far. Yeah, but here, let's have another ding. Here's another proposition, hexiety. The sounds of the machine are the thisness of the machine. Hexiety is a concept, as I understand it, from 13th century philosophy that I encountered when reading Deleuze and Guattari, Thousand Plateaus. It has to do with the idea of thingness or thisness. And used in the context of sound art, I see hexiety as defining sort of an inextricable link between sounds and the objects or assemblages that make them, whether the sound is identifiable or not. The particular sound an artwork makes becomes linked to that artwork and contributes to its overall thisness or thingness, and can even, in some cases, stand in for the work itself. Deleuze uses the example of the heat in William Faulkner's novel, Light in August. So I don't know if you're familiar with that work, but heat is like a very strong theme there. It's set in the Deep South. And so there's just it's not a character, but it has this presence and this thisness or thingness. So anyway, I apply this concept to thinking about some of the work that I've been doing. So this is Spiral, a piece from 2018. I'm going to kind of jump through it a little bit because it's a little long. So it's a kinetic work, features 3 cast bronze rods, approximately 60 centimeters in length. And they are attached to a motor suspended from the ceiling. The rods lift and twist and shift as the motor rotates, incidentally marking the concrete that they're sitting on. I'll jump ahead. You can sort of see what this does. This rope twists. Let's see, where's the rope? Here's the rope, it's twisting. Here's the motor. And then you can sort of see it in the context. Slowly moving, slowly twisting, and sort of wrapping around itself. So this was not set out to be a sound work, but it's a work that makes sound. So there's a difference, I think. And so this is where I kind of like to work in this kind of a space. And I've been working in a lot of cast bronze too. So here's another piece. We'll move ahead with this. This is called Displacer. And this one is a self-inflatable mattress that is attached to a timer. So it comes on periodically in the gallery space. And I'll just let this start for you so you can get a sense of the sound. And then it fills up and it lifts the work. This thing is quite heavy. It's probably about 30 kg or something. So, and then it just sort of does that on repeat with a pretty good amount of distance in between the time that it inflates, deflates. It's one of those sort of futility pieces, I guess, if you're into that sort of thing. Okay. Another proposition: sound is a stick with which to hit, or a bell is a cup until it is struck. This is the Kyosaku. It's also known as the stick of compassion or the encouragement stick. It's used to help meditators regain focus during long periods of zazen, sitting, and concentration. There's a moment of transformation realized by the strike, a moment of creative energy and rejuvenation that brings one instantly into the present. A bell is a cup until it is struck. And I am again reminded here of Deleuze and Guattari and their concept, the order word, which is a phrase that changes something from one state to another. The most probably banal example of that is the word abracadabra, right? And it's results in something appearing, disappearing, transforming from one thing to another. And here is from that same exhibit from Spiral, frequency shift. This is a sound that was placed in the gallery. That's Spiral. You heard clanking from before. But this happens in the gallery every so often. It's a randomly selected frequency, and the transducers are placed under the floor tiles, so it vibrates the room. It's just a way to bring people right back into the present because they don't know what's going to happen. We'll keep going. I didn't make that phrase up. It's from this record, Wire, if you're familiar with them. Okay, we're almost done. When we hug, I hear your ear. So this is just sort of a studio shot of these paintings that you saw from the GIF before, or GIF, if you want. When we hug, I hear your ear is this painting of these words spread across these several irregularly shaped pieces of wood. The suggested close and brief listening opportunity provided by a hug may not really reveal anything much to the listener or the hugger, but rather is a statement of desire and connection. We read it and then visualize this moment of the hug and maybe even hear it in our heads. I keep returning to sound and its ability to connect, to pause, to pronounce, to stutter, to vibrate, to resonate, to interrupt, to deterritorialize and re-territorialize. And sound is a poetics through acoustic ecology, conceptual art, philosophy. All of these things blend together have led me to the studio practice that I have now, and it continues to guide it going forward. So I really appreciate you listening. Thank you. Yes.
I have a very short question.
Okay.
How long has the bars been going to create that pattern?
Yeah.
Weeks into the exhibition?
Yeah, so the question was, how long did it take to make the marks on the tile from the work Spiral? Yeah, that's probably a few weeks in. Yeah, and it was running, just while the exhibit was up, and we turned it off at night. But yeah, it took a while. And also there was a moment when it got stuck, so it kind of, and the guard at the gallery was calling me like, hey, your piece is stuck. Like, what should I do? Because he didn't want to touch it. So I was like, yeah, just untangle it and let it go. Yeah.
I thought the concentric circle was quickly full. So that's, were you expecting it to be that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it was one of those things where it was like, I had this strange way of working, which is that sometimes I'll make something and then go, what am I going to do with this? And that's when I discover the actual sonority of the piece, because that was not designed to make that specific sound, right? It was, the objects were made and they were just going to sound the way they sounded. So, so that was a similar thing with the marking on the floor. I knew it was going to do something, but I was just really willing to let the process go and be what it was going to be. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So the question is, how do you manage having multiple sound pieces in a gallery space? Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a battle that people who work with sound have to face all the time. The mattress piece was not in that same exhibit. It was in the same gallery, but it was not in the same exhibit. So there were different times. So the things that were making sound were Spiral together, and then the intermittent frequency shift, what vibrates the floor. So they didn't really compete with each other so much, because also one is continuous and one is intermittent. Those were the only two that made sound. Yeah. Right. So they were all basically sound pieces that were silent except for Spiral and frequency shift. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But some of them were not, even though they might suggest it if you really were trying hard. But yeah, I think that's time. Thank you, everybody. Thanks again. Appreciate it.